I really did. I was 39, over 39 years with the department. I was a 14th employee in 1953. But the county only had 86,000 then. I understand that we're getting up around 360,000. The size of the department has increased to almost 400. It was almost 300 when I left. But we never seemed to have enough people to handle all the calls.
Well, let's see, the first cars I remember, and I think they went back quite a ways, because when I was a kid I still remember the same cars, and they were green, similar to the green of the uniform, and they had a bubblegum machine, you know, the red bubblegum machine light on the top, and at one time they had federal free roller sirens mounted on the fenders. Finally they got those under the hood and out of the way, and they had those for a long time. When I first came to work at the sheriff's office in '66, they were still driving that car. And a free roller did non-electric and mechanical. And the free roller, when you pushed the button, it rolled it up, and when you put the finger off the button, it you know, wound down. But you arrived on a call and the siren's going, and you just shut it off, and it'd wind itself down sometime. And let's see, that was in '66. I think it was '69. We went to a new car, and those were the brown and tan kind of colored car, painted the door on them. Got the first light bars. Got the first electronic sirens with PA systems and that sort of stuff. I remember the public really liked them. The comments about it. You know, when you change cars, the fact is that people will see you more often than they do. And the people that say, we never saw you before, will tell you that they see you all the time now, when in reality you're not there anymore. You just got a different colored car.
On the summer days, they had no air conditioning, and you swelter in the thing, and you just couldn't wait to get off work, so you go and hop in the shower or go swimming or whatever it was. And nowadays, having air conditioning, the officer, it doesn't mind, you know, staying on patrol and working out there, because even if you get out of the car and you have to be out in the hot sun for a while, you know you got that car to get back into and cool down.
In 1993, Riz Bradshaw was elected sheriff. He joined the Sheriff's Department in 1966. In 1967, he was promoted to lieutenant and acted as the department's watch commander, chief of detectives, and operations commander. In 1982, he was promoted to captain, where he was also the head of the department's computer project. He also supervised department special investigations. In 1983, he was appointed chief deputy by Sheriff Bill Brooks. Bradshaw is a graduate of the FBI National Academy. He also taught classes in law enforcement at Clackamas Community College. During Bradshaw's terms in office, forensic science began to develop into an art form. Cammie Hines became the first forensic artist to work for the county in criminal investigations.
Well, forensics wasn't introduced as a viable part of investigation until 1966, which is really frequent, really recent. I mean, they even had some forensic sketches done with Jack the Ripper, some of his victims, but that wasn't a viable art form, a part of police work. Forensic artists give a piece of the puzzle, and it's a piece of the puzzle that not everybody can form. One thing I would really hope that anybody that's dealt with Clackamas County and has gone through this drawing process with me and worked with the detectives, I would hope that each one of them feel well served. We do care about what happened. We are focusing our energy on and identifying the people. You're only as good as your next IDs.
told a story, I don't know how many times. We were lucky when I started there and for a long time because the shift started at 8 a.m. in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, and midnight, and it ran till 8. And it wasn't as frantic a business then. And the sheriff, the chief deputy, all the detectives, all of the management staff, everybody got together at 7:30 in the morning, and you sat around and coffee and donuts, and you told war stories and so forth, and then you had your little roll call and you got out of there. At 4 in the afternoon, people were back in the office, get together again, and the upshot of that was everybody got to talk to these people every day. And there was a realization that, yeah, the sheriff was a real cop. He may not be now, he may just be the sheriff, but he was a real cop. He's got all these stories, experience to respect other people. And the same way with everybody down the line, you had more of an understanding where people were coming from, where today we run a variety of shifts. People come to work different hours of the day. There simply is no time to go sit, on a normal routine basis, sit down for a half an hour, and chit-chat about non-business kind of things, and that connection has really been lost.
Most of my work was done with the recently retired Sheriff Riz Bradshaw. I thought him just absolutely great to work with. We had a very solid team approach to how we administered this office, and worked very well together. We did a lot of stuff. He was just a great sheriff to work with. He really let me run a large part of the office around here, and mentored me to prepare me to be the next sheriff of Clackamas County.
Pat Detloff will be the only sheriff in this state that has ever been sheriff of 2 counties. He's worked as chief of detectives. He's been in charge of, I think, every division except possibly corrections. And he's been with the department 30 years, so he really does know it. He's a graduate of the FBI Academy. He's had all of the different responsibilities of different divisions, so he knows that department inside and out. He's going to do a wonderful job. We've seen good sheriffs, bad sheriffs, mediocre sheriffs, and a few outstanding sheriffs. It isn't for everyone. They have to remember that being a sheriff is a political office. They have to remember that there's an immense amount of responsibility attached to that position, and they really have to know in their own heart if they're up to it, because not everybody is.
A pitch for the men and women of the office. I mean, it's a tremendous group of people, and they do an outstanding job. I mean, it's not always a pleasant job. There seems to always be some controversy around and whatnot, and these people go to work, and they work hard, and they work right.
If you keep your nose clean, it's a wonderful, wonderful career. And it's extremely rewarding to be able to help those that need help and to put the bad guys in behind bars.
How did we do the job before as compared to the way it is nowadays? And there's so many more advances coming up.
Sheriff's Department in Clackamas County is probably one of the finest sheriff's departments on the West Coast. Now, I know that sounds prejudicial, but I know these other departments, and I know the sheriffs.
A Sheriff's Poem by Sheriff Charles Barnes, circa 1940. Now, this sheriff's job is a curious one. Like housewives' work, it's never done. Calls come by night and some in the day. They may be nearby, miles away. You can't get excited when out on a call, because you might do the thing you shouldn't do at all. You mustn't get nervous or lose your head, for if someone gets shot, he's a long time dead. Sometimes they plead guilty, and the judge will scold. Then half the county will want them paroled. They'll blame the Depression, the New Deal, the tariff. But a few of them folks put the blame on the sheriff. So it's quite a game if you stay right in. You'll get a pat on the back and a sock on the chin. But I like it that way, and I'm shedding no tears, for I hope to be here for many more years.
It's been a good ride. Thank you.
Clatco TV, your local source for news and information in Clackamas County.
The Clackamas County Courthouse can be found near the banks of the Willamette River in downtown Oregon City. Built during President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal program, it is more than 60 years old. Before this courthouse was built, another courthouse stood on the same block of land. And before that, there was another courthouse, possibly two, located above the bluffs of Oregon City. In order to understand the story of this building, we need to go back through time and explore the history of the Clackamas County Courthouse. Back in the days of the Wild West, the area now known as Clackamas County had a number of settled communities. It was rich in trade and commerce. It had law and order and its own system of government and justice. In fact, no place in Clackamas County ever resembled the Old West, which lay hundreds of miles to the east. Buffalo still roamed the country in large numbers, and Native Americans had not yet been confined to reservations. Out of this era came a mountain man who had heard of the Oregon Territory and thought it would be a good place to retire from fur trapping and try his hand at farming. His name was Joe Meek.
I'm done with life in the mountains. Done with waiting in beaver dams and freezing or starving alternately. Done with Indian trading and Indian fighting. The fur trade is dead in the Rocky Mountains. We are young yet and have life before us. Let us go down to the Willamette and take farms. Joseph Meek, 1839.
When 102 men met at Champoeg in 1843 to vote on an American-run government for the Oregon Territory, the vote was 52 to 50 to form their own government. Joe Meek helped shape that government when he shouted his famous question, "Who's for a divide?" Joe Meek was chosen to be the area's first sheriff. Later, he would be appointed U.S. Marshal by President James Polk.
The question that was asked by Joe Meek, one of the early American settlers in the Pacific Northwest, he asked, "Who is for the divide?" which was the determining question in which Americans then voted, along with some supporting French Canadians, to sever a diplomatic treaty with the British, which had been established since 1818. This vote, taken in 1843 at Champoeg, was unofficial in the sense that it wasn't sanctioned by the United States Congress, but it definitely led to the early formation of the government in this area.
Sometimes people say that Joe Meek didn't really step out at Champoeg and say, "Who's for a divide, follow me," and so forth. Well, the truth is that there are 5 people who were there who said that Joe Meek did have this part, and it's undoubted that he did. Perhaps he didn't say the exact words. His dialogue might have been slightly different, but it's just undoubtedly true that he did step forth as the story goes. The story is that they were so crowded. Hudson's Bay had a warehouse there, and they were so crowded in that warehouse, and they took the vote, and nobody could count the vote because of the crowd. So the secretary told them to move outside and divide and be counted. And then Joe Meek, according to the story, spoke up and said, "Who's for a divide? Follow me, all those that want to divide." And he went off to one side and the others went to the other, and that's how they counted the vote.
For the most part, the early immigrants were law-abiding. The country was quiet, and each person went about their business in a peaceful manner. There was no need for a courthouse or even a jail. Early judiciary meetings found no cases to prosecute. Chief Justice William P. Bryant held the first district court in the home of Peter Hatch in Oregon City. After that, the Orleans Building was used, and up to 1850, the old City Hotel was used for court cases.
The old records show very little crime, well, almost none. I think people had to work so hard to keep body and soul together that they behaved.
During a legislative meeting in 1844 in Oregon City, it was recommended that a public jail be erected for the territory.
Although the community has suffered very little as yet for want of such a building, and perhaps another year might pass without its being occupied, we are assured that it is better policy to have the building without a tenant than a tenant without the building. Oregon Legislature meeting, 1844.
After the death of prominent pioneer Ewing Young, the money from his estate was claimed by Oregon's new government since he had no family in the area. These funds were used to construct a new jail between what is now 4th and 5th Street. The site for the jail was donated to the city by Dr. John McLaughlin.
Gentlemen, I beg to acknowledge the receipt of yours of this date, and I have great pleasure in acceding to your request, and give all that point of land laying between 4th and 5th Cross Street between Water Street and the river for the purpose of your request, reserving all rights to former and to revert to me when not used as a jail. I am, gentlemen, your obedient, humble servant, John McLaughlin. December, 1844.
Once the jail was completed, it became the first public building west of the Rocky Mountains. Unfortunately, 16 months later, the new jail was burned to the ground by an arsonist without any record of it being used. Probably the best known example of early justice in Clackamas County is that of 5 members of the Cayuse tribe accused of the killing and kidnapping of residents of the Whitman Mission in 1847. It was nearly 3 years after the massacre before the Native Americans were brought to trial in Oregon City. Territorial Judge O.C. Pratt conducted the trial on May 22, 1850.
Court is now adjourned.
Whether or not these 5 individuals were actually guilty of the crime, no one was ever able to ascertain. But these were dangerous times for the Cayuse tribe, and the jury rendered them guilty. Judge Pratt sentenced each defendant to be hanged on June 3, 1850.
The tribe just picked out and said, you're going to be the one to do it, and whatnot, because the story has always been that one old squaw wailed and moaned and all, and said he didn't do it, he was with me and that, and he didn't do it and whatnot, even right up until they hung him. See? But anyhow, the populace, you see, was so in tumult because those 13 girls that they took as hostages and whatnot. All right, the Caulfields had 2 of them. The Charmans had 1. I think at one time they said 8 of the girls from that had been taken into homes in Oregon City. Well, of course, the stories those girls were telling the people in Oregon City, why, it didn't make you very happy with the Indian population, you see. And so that's why when they were hung, they waited until after night, dark and whatnot, and took them down and put them in a buckboard wagon and brought them and went over and crossed the thing, and on the road that was going to Clackamas Heights or the Beaver Creek Redland Road that's down in there through the chops, and then buried him in place, and they said the mound that was on the kind of a curve of the creek down in there, why, was where they buried him and all, and then as time went on, why, they dumped more dirt on him and more dirt on him, why, so that nobody would get to them at all, because they were afraid that people would desecrate the graves and would destroy them, see. And they didn't put any marker, they just kept it to themselves, except for family, and this is where one of them in the family had told about it in later years.
The Whitman Massacre was an important event in that it helped place the Oregon Territory under the protection of the federal government. It also made residents realize that they needed a courthouse in their new territory and that Oregon City was the logical place to build it. There is little information on the first courthouse. Records show that a courthouse was built in 1850 on Block 13 in Oregon City. Court was held there until it was burned down in 1857 by an inebriate named Washington Williams. He apparently accidentally set fire to the building while he was intoxicated.
On the plat of Oregon City, 1850, a significant document in its own right, of course, we locate the early courthouse, the Clackamas Courthouse, at between 6th and 7th and Jefferson Streets in Oregon City, right here. This building was replaced in the 1880s by the second courthouse.
Following the destruction of the courthouse, the court occupied the Myers Building, also known as the McIntyre Building at 6th and Main Street. The courtrooms were on the second floor, and the recorder and clerk's offices occupied the first floor. Some records show that another courthouse was built near the site of the original courthouse, but it too burned down soon after it was built.
No, I've heard of a gavel made out of material out of the courthouse that burned. Well, the only courthouses that could have burned are the 2 that they had up on the hill. And I think one was a framed, and the first one was a log cabin. Well, I think that there were 2 of them, because after all, a log cabin wouldn't last long. And then they would have had to have replaced it. And I imagine the first courthouse, why, all that it was a hall, because they didn't have all these bureaus and all these offices and whatnot. They would have had the sheriff's deal.
Around this time, law enforcement was beginning to develop in the Oregon Territory. Joseph Meek was appointed as the first sheriff in 1843. But when he was appointed marshal, the job of sheriff went to a man named William Livingston Holmes. William Holmes was elected sheriff in 1845. He served 7 one-year terms from 1845 to 1852. He then lost an election to William C. Dement, who served only 1 year. Holmes was then re-elected for another 2 terms. During the 1840s, Holmes had 2 deputies to cover a county that stretched from the Willamette Valley to Canada to the Rocky Mountains. It was now time for a new jail. Businessman Sidney Moss built the next jail in 1854. The jail was made from cast iron and was probably built inside a wood structure near the falls. It had poor ventilation, so Moss hired a mechanic to drill holes in the wall to let some air in. It was a small cell with 2 bunk beds and must have been dark, stuffy, and miserable. The old jail is currently at the Oregon Historical Society in Portland, Oregon.
The courthouse had burned the year we came west in 1849, so there was no regular courthouse. This first building was situated 1 block above the park, about where Miss Charman's property is now. We used to rent different places for the courthouse. Wherever there was a new and better building in Oregon City, we'd take up new quarters there. It was not until 1884 that the present courthouse was built. Tom Miller, bailiff, Clackamas County Courthouse, 1927.
This courthouse had a clock in the dome, a jail in the basement, and a sheriff's office. Prisoners could look out of barred windows and talk to people on the street. The building had a hot air piped heating system, which was relatively new for the time, and hitching posts stood outside ready to accommodate visitors. As time went by, the boundaries of the county grew smaller as the population expanded. Judges came and went. These judges held absolute power in the courtrooms. Judges Thomas McBride, James Campbell, and Earl LaTourette were some of the judges to preside over court cases in the old courthouse.
My old partner Arthur Beatty said that one time he was going up the steps in the old courthouse and Jim Campbell, the judge, was going up too. And they exchanged pleasantries, and Arthur Beatty asked Jim Campbell, the judge, how he was. Well, Campbell